Well, I apologise for the ringneck parakeets which appear to be taking over the roof. But actually I think it's people's phones probably that are interfering with the AV. Gosh, well here I am, and there you are. It's been a brilliant conference so far. I've learned lots, although I've been a Beaver student for a long time. And I'm immensely grateful to all of you who've participated. Could somebody find my presentation? No? I wonder where it... Oh, I found it myself. And I'm not being paid. So I'm trying to open my presentation.
Sorry. I've put the air conditioner back on. Is this your one here?
Whoa! Okay.
And that's the clicky thing.
Okay, my name is John Lister-Kaye. I'm a naturalist, I'm a writer, I run a field study centre, as I think some of you will know. And I've been interested in the natural environment for well over 50 years. And I make no apology this afternoon for going seriously off-piste. And my thanks to Michelle Branson, who put that little video together for me for this presentation, who's here in the audience. She's one of our range of staff. The reason that I'm going off-piste is that I have never seen the beaver as an isolated issue or subject. I've always seen the beaver as part of a much wider picture. Now, if we put all the living organisms in the world into a big ball, it moves about entirely naturally according to the Milankovitch cycle. That is our elliptical journey and our tilt around the sun, which gives us our seasons and so on. I'm sure you all know that. And that ball of biodiversity moves backwards and forwards entirely naturally, but doesn't get any smaller until the impact of man comes into the equation. And I've used Native American because we know that they did manipulate their habitat a long time ago. And the consequence of the impact of man over the last 15,000 years has been absolutely disastrous for biodiversity and biomass right across the globe, whether it's the fish of the ocean or whether it's the forests or whatever else. But of course it's not the end of the story. And if you turn the timeline up to the 21st and 22nd centuries, it ought to be possible that if we mobilize science and technology, imagination, intelligence, people power and political will, it ought to be possible to regrow that ball. And that's my priority in life at the end of a 50-year career in nature conservation. I want to promote restoration ecology because it is the way that we can put things back. It is the challenge we all face, rebuilding natural capital for the benefit of future generations of people and wildlife. Now, there have been a number of great waves of destruction. You go back to the Stone Age and direct hunting did away with the woolly mammoth and the cave bear and the woolly rhinoceros and the dire wolf and all sorts of other wonderful species. And then along came agriculture in the Bronze Age, which began to change habitats very dramatically. Then came industrial and urban activity from the 17th century right through the Industrial Revolution. Translocation has been a wave that's very often misunderstood of human impact, moving stuff around the globe, whether it's tobacco or tomatoes or potatoes or other organisms. And of course now we face climate change as another great wave of human impact over biodiversity and the natural environment. And it's been happening for a long time. We are waking up to it at last, but it has been happening for a long time. And it's caused genetic isolation also as a wave which has seriously affected biodiversity. And I put in green the seventh great wave, which is a hope. It's a wish that restoration ecology could be the next great way to improve man's impact on the natural environment. Now, the best example I can come up with, of course, is the ancient Caledonian pine forest. The pale green is the original range. It's 6.1 million acres, and the green dots are what we've got left. So that's what we human beings have done to one of the great natural resources of the Highlands of Scotland. It's very beautiful, you all know it, it's absolutely fabulous. But our track record in nature conservation has been simply abysmal. It's been ghastly because of the way that we have destroyed really important species. We've pushed into extinction the wolf, the European brown bear, the lynx, the beaver, of course, hunted out in the 16th century, the great sea eagle because it had the temerity to eat fish, the red kite, the osprey, right down to the last bear in the 1950s on the Findhorn. We've so removed the habitat for the greatest grouse in the world that we've virtually destroyed its chances despite numerous reintroductions. So our track record is pretty grim. We pushed the pine marten to within an inch of its twitching whiskers of extinction, but it was rescued by the proliferation of commercial forestry in the 1970s, which gave it sanctuary. And here we are with the wildcat, our last wild felid in really, really dire distress. Did you know that by 1913 we were shipping out 250,000 tons of herring from Scotland every year? As a consequence of that, the herring was forced to reduce its breeding cycle from the norm of 3 years old down to 2 years old in order to be able to survive. And you will also know that because of herring fishing bans, slowly but surely some of those stocks have begun to recover. But still we face considerable losses. We pushed the corncrake to the remotest corners of Scotland. The corn buntings have virtually disappeared. We persecute the hen harrier to death all over Scotland. And it looks as though the curlew and the lapwing are also going to be victims of probably climate change and other activities by man, such as overgrazing and far too many deer and those other factors. This picture, taken only a few miles north of my home in Indonesia, was once climax forest. It is now what Sir Frank Fraser-Darling identified in 1949 as a wet desert. The degradation of the uplands is still not accepted or properly understood by many. We have been very, very slow to face up to our responsibilities in the natural environment. These are the Victorians who built my house, And I don't want you to look at their picnic fancy dress, I want you to look at the land behind them. When I bought my estate in 1976, that land was as bald as a plate. It was what's called sour old moorland. It had been burned and grazed and burned and grazed and burned and grazed for centuries until it was bumping along at the lowest common denominator of coarse grasses and sphagnum mosses. And look at it now. After a 35-year restoration ecology project, it's an all-singing, all-dancing native woodland with 16 species of breeding songbirds, with foxes, with badgers, with red squirrels, with pine martens, actually with wildcats too. And here are some of the successes of nature conservation. Sea eagles introduced to Rum in 75, now 130 pairs. We hacked out red kites on our land. They've established very well. We've brought the beaver back. Congratulations to everybody involved. We set up our demonstration project at Avis in 2006, and we still have beavers today. And now we have a captive wildcat breeding project. These are all successful restoration ecology projects we should be very proud of, but they have happened on the back of individual effort and very, very little political will and money put behind them. Those are kittens born. Alicia is here. She was our staff naturalist for 6 years and was responsible for the breeding of these lovely wildcats. And we are at it again, and Ben Jones, our staff naturalist, is sitting up there, and these are his contribution to restoration ecology. There you are, Pete. I promised you one of your pictures. Pete Cairns is here in the audience. Wonderful wildlife photographer. Yet, while these species restoration projects have been successful, the world has continued to inflict terrible damage to the natural environment. And something else is beginning to happen. And this is where I'm going seriously off piste, because I cannot separate what you're about to see from the beaver issue. You may have noticed that the world is changing. People power has begun to demand an end to fossil fuel consumption and is creating a market advantage for going green. If you have two companies, one goes green and the other is a competitor and thinks, oops, they're stealing the market, they will go green. We've been desperately slow to press the market advantage in caring for the natural environment. Governments must now listen, provide incentives, and respond urgently to the crisis of climate change. Young people no longer accept the status quo and are demanding that change. Carbon emissions must be contained, and agriculture must become sustainable and protect soils and biodiversity. These are imperatives. They must be done. So, what is all this about climate change? And I don't make no apology for putting this in, because still a lot of people really haven't grasped what it's about, and of course, what's it got to do with beavers? Well, in 2015 we had the wonderful Paris conference and the Accord, and it looked really good, of course, until the Americans pulled out. Boo to them. The common goal agreed at that conference was to hold temperatures to well below 2 degrees C and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5. The collective plan was to cut anthropocentric emissions and to achieve a balance by removals and sinks really important in the second half of this century. We have upset the energy balance of our planet very badly indeed. As the energy accumulates, the world warms. Ice and snows melt and sea levels rise. Ocean and atmospheric circulation shifts. Extreme weather events increase. Water cycles accelerate. Ecosystems fracture. Food and water supplies are affected, and people and species are impacted. And you've all seen the pictures on the television. They are coming more and more frequent from more and more countries around the world. Serious consequences for human beings and human activities. And of course, desperate people migrate. And you know, where are those millions of Bangladeshis going to go when Bangladesh disappears under the waves? Now, this fascinated me. I found this on the internet. Okay, it's dated 2014 and America isn't quite in the same place. But this came from the US Department of Defense. And just listen to what they were saying in 2014. Their adaptation roadmap was rising global temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, climbing sea levels, more extreme weather events will intensify the challenges of global instability, hunger and conflict. They will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic diseases, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions across the globe. Well, I couldn't have put it better myself. What a pity President Trump hasn't read his own Department of Defense's roadmap. This will affect everybody at every level of activity. It has to become the greatest collective action in human history. Government, business and citizens have to come together to address this issue urgently. I found this on the internet too, and it's scary. God, it's scary. Look where climate change comes in government priorities in the United States of America, one of the biggest economies in the world, one of the biggest burners of fossil fuels in the world. Look at everything that comes ahead of it: the economy, federal spending, healthcare, unemployment, size of federal government, social security, hunger and homelessness, crime and violence, terrorism. Oh God, it goes on, and poor old climate change dribbles along at the bottom. We are all dependent upon energy. By coming here today, by travelling to this event, by using these lights, the heating, the amplification of my voice, we've contributed to the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, all of us. There will be carbon atoms generated by this event today that will still be in the air that my great-grandchildren will breathe. That is our legacy. And science can't tell us what's right and wrong. Don't expect it to. It can inform, but it cannot arbitrate and it cannot decide. Science can say that if we burn another 500 billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere, atmospheric CO2 will go up by another 100 parts per million, and that will lead to warming of the planet greater than 2 degrees Celsius, with major disruption of the climate system and huge risks for the natural world and human well-being. But it can't answer the moral questions. Do we care about future generations? I'm looking at little Flora Ramsey sitting here. Do we care about nature? Do we see the environment as part of the economy, or what governments have traditionally done and seeing the economy as part of the environment? The whole point about climate change is that it's not just about science. It's an issue about what sort of world we want to live in. What kind of future for our children? What do we care about nature? What can we do about it? Waiting to see what happens is simply not good enough. We need to act now. Now, although Leopold, the wonderful, groundbreaking father of nature conservation, wrote in 1949, "The thing is right," when she had upset Flora now, she's he wrote, "The thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." We can work towards creating living forests and restoration ecology. A living forest is a dynamic, biodiverse woodland community with massive benefits for us all. Woodland creation is a vital carbon sink, being no doubt that climate change will drive huge changes to forestry practices in the decades ahead. But aren't we creating carbon sinks already? No. Driven by planting targets and fast-growing exotic species, intensive tree farms, which in my view are not forests, have dominated our landscapes for 50 years. We need to apply the principles of restoration ecology and living forests to all our woodland plantings. The broadleaf deciduous component in all woods needs to be far larger than it has been historically. For decades it was stuck at 5%, and cynically many foresters would plant those broadleaves in bogs where they wouldn't grow. And now, at last, the Scottish Forest Strategy has identified 20%, which is a step in the right direction, but it needs to be at least 50% to create living forests. Now, this is research done by Harvard University, and what it tells us is that the older a native forest gets, the more effective it is at carbon sequestration. And you can see from this graph that from 1992 to 2008, in the 6 New England states, Harvard discovered that native woodland sequestration dramatically increased. So, a restoration ecology vision does not call for less forestry, it calls for much, much more, but designed by a living forest culture. Many of Scotland's bare hills could be reforested with multi-age class, continuous cover, biodiverse woods, conifer and broadleaf for sensitive commercial use. Fungi are essential to every living forest, as are habitats for aquatic species. We now know that mycorrhizal fungi enable trees and other plants to talk to each other underground. Deadwood is an essential component of a living forest, especially for saprophytic fungi and the vital processes of returning nutrients to the soil. Beavers create deadwood everywhere. Deadwood provides many unexpected microhabitats and nest sites. And for lichens, mosses and liverworts, you know, we overlook those precious members of the biotic community. And food and habitat for many species of bugs, beetles and other insects, all coming together to complete the food pyramids that define a living forest. I asked for whiskey, but I've only got water. And of course, beavers, the essential keystone species that should be present in all wetland ecosystems. All wetland ecosystems. Beaver deadwood is an essential living forest component. Wetland is extremely important for biodiversity. Traditional drainage techniques need to be modified, and beavers encouraged to allow wetland to flourish. Beavers are brilliant wetland engineers, and they work for free, as has been clearly illustrated here today. And wildlife will quickly colonize and exploit new wetland. A living forest wetland is not complete without the presence of beavers. And many bird species will quickly find the wetland and move in, as will invertebrates essential in food chains. Water shrews, otters, water voles, all will move in quickly if we provide the habitats by using beavers. Beaver lagoons collect silt and are rich in biodiversity. We've proved that with our own demonstration project at Aegis over the past 12 years. Wetland is also an essential resource for environmental education. And I'm sorry to say that far too many of our conservation NGOs have neglected environmental education throughout most of my career as a conservationist. It is absolutely essential if we are to take hearts and minds and people with us. A living forest restoration ecology vision seeks to influence woodland and wetland design away from conventional practices to an altogether more sustainable future, delivering these benefits. More effective carbon capture, right at the top of the list. Better flood retention, we've heard lots about that. protection from wind and storm. A native wood is much, much better at coping with wind and storm. Much more biodiversity. Soils building fertility, not losing it. Very appealing scenery. Multiple benefits for ecotourism and people's enjoyment, and multiple options for industry. Environmental education should be an essential component of the national curriculum, and it's not. We neglect it and we deny it horribly, and starting young is really important. Children must be taught to understand and value wildlife and natural processes, and why the beaver is needed as an essential tool in that process. And it needs to be fun. Not just for children, because nature is a brilliant way to win hearts and minds. And I just quickly want to tell you an anecdote. When we set up our Beaver demonstration project, we invited fishermen's fishing boards and fishing groups and foresters and farmers and all sorts of people to come. And they came. And we had a group one day from a river I shan't name, and most of the everybody was wearing tweed, and they all had Volvo estates. And they turned up, and you could tell from their body language and their countenance that they did not like beavers. And we gave them a presentation, we walked them around the loch, we showed them a beaver lodge, a beaver dam, a beaver lagoon. We persuaded them, I hope, that beavers were beneficial, and they got in their Volvos and they drove away. Except that one man stopped, got out of his car, and came back and shook me by the hand. And he said, "Thank you, John. When I came here, I thought beavers ate fish." But he didn't say it in front of his peers. He didn't want to be out of the crowd. Now, that's part of the problem, and it was touched on by Duncan in his last talk. It is a social problem. We are tribal by nature, and we reinforce our prejudices and our misinformation, our fake news, that's the word to use, all the time. Because of the overuse of pesticides, we now face an invertebrate crisis. Here are some species that have actually benefited and increased on the back of the Aegis Beaver project. Bee beetles, golden ringed dragonflies, tiger beetles. Many Lepidoptera have increased. Poplar hawk moth, magpie moth, emperor moth, all increased. Wood mice and voles have increased dramatically and are a vital food for all the carnivores and many birds of prey. We've got a greater instance of tawny and barn owls now than we've had for years. Many bird species have benefited from the presence of our beavers at Aegis. Please be in no doubt that because of climate change, future generations of foresters, farmers and conservationists have a very complex and challenging task ahead of them. Living forests and restoration ecology are the future for us all. It will require patience and endless compromise. But with care and time, we can make it work for everyone. So what do we need to do? We need effective mitigation. Thank you, Gerhard, for your lovely demonstration. We need a trained volunteer program such as being so successful in Bavaria. We all know beavers in the wrong place can cause problems. We need a licensed, rapid response team to trap and remove troublesome beavers into non-contentious habitat, such as the River Beaver. To win hearts and minds, responses need to be in hours, not days or weeks. If you've got an angry farmer who wants something done, we've got to get there and do it quickly. Beaver ecotourism can greatly benefit rural communities. Aegis Field Centre works with 160 Highland schools, delivering fieldwork to up to 7,000 school pupils every year. Our adult programs handle 750 one-week visitors each year. Since 2006, 9,000 adults and over 50,000 school children have experienced the Aegis Beaver demonstration project firsthand. They've gone away knowing and understanding what role the beaver plays in the natural environment.
When I announced to my children that we're going to Agas, their eyes just light up and they're so excited because they've had so many fantastic wildlife experiences here. They know that they're going to be really, really up close to pine martens and badgers, and this trip has not failed to produce all the wildlife that we expect.
You did a hide visit last night.
We did, and
tell us about it.
Oh gosh, it's amazing. So we had 3 pine martens.
Oh wow.
And then they were seen off by a badger, and then another badger. So in the space of about 45 minutes, with 3 pine martens and 2 badgers. My son said he was tingling with excitement. It's so magical, and those close-up experiences are so important for children, especially nowadays where we only really see wildlife on television. And coming up here and having those experiences is just so special, and they have such a connection with the wildlife.
New Dawn is Restoration Ecology. My thanks to all those wonderful contributors of photographs. The challenge we all face is to make it happen. And there's a lovely quote from Gary Snyder: stay together, know the flowers, go light. Thank you very much.